Oh.
This is Diana Sullivan in Austin, Texas, and I've been doing a couple of lessons on essential seams for beginning knitting machine people, and I'm going to do mattress stitch that you would use up the side of a sweater, and I'm laying out the two pieces of knitting so that they can be seamed in this direction. Now the seam is going to run just inside the very first stitch in the knitting. On this one it's curled a little. Let me lift it up and show that. That's where the seam is going to go. If you put the needle between two rows of the knitting, you can see that there's a little vertical bar between each of the vertical columns, I should say, of the knitting. Of course, in this picture, they're horizontal because I've got the knitting sideways, but in between here, you can see these little threads, and that is what I'm going to catch with the mattress stitch seam. I'm going to start by bringing a contrasting color of thread on a tapestry needle through the first stitch. And I just want to mention that of course you would use matching yarn if you were sewing up a sweater. I'm doing this for visibility. And then on the other one, I'm going to go through the exact same spot. That just gets me started. So that's my beginning. Now, following this vertical line right here, or as I'm holding the yarn, it's horizontal, between two columns of stitches, I'm going in exactly the same spot that I came out of, and I'm coming up 2 bars higher up. And then I'm just going to pull this through. I'm not pulling the seam tight just yet because I want where the yarn went to be visible. Then I go from this top sample to the bottom sample. I go in exactly where I came out as I started. I go under 2 little bits of yarn and then come up again toward my left, and you can see this first couple of stitches. When you hand sew, they call this ladder stitch, and you see it's forming a ladder. In machine knitting we call this mattress stitch, but this is a wonderful stitch for hand knitters to learn because it will help you to create really professionally looking finished garments. This stitch will vanish. It'll be an invisible seam once I pull the yarn tight. So I always go to the opposite sample, the other piece of the knitting. I go in exactly where I came out. Can you see that spot? Then I go under 2 little bars of yarn and come up. I'm going to pull it not tight. Then on the other piece of the knitting, I go in exactly where I came out, under 2 bars and across to the left. I'll do a couple more just to keep it visible. Now I have this spread out on a table on top of a dark towel for visibility, but if you were actually doing this, you would probably hold it in your hands a little differently. Now before I pull this tight, look at the way that these stitches are forming. Each time I have gone in the same hole I came out of and come up 2 bars higher, and I'm doing a stitch here, then a stitch here, then a stitch here. I'm going to take one more stitch, holding it up, in where I came out, under 2 threads, and then out to the left. Now let me pull this tight so that you can see how the seam vanishes. You don't want to pull it so tight that the knitting loses all of its vertical stretch. So you might want to tighten it and then yank it this way a little bit. Just make sure that it has a little bit of stretch left. Now when you're actually sewing this seam, you might hold the knitting this way. So I'm going to hold it this way for a little distance and show you how that looks. Going in exactly where I came out, under 2 threads, and out again. Needles come unthreaded. Do my pinch threading method. then go in exactly where I came out, under 2 threads, and come out again. In exactly where I came out, under 2 threads, and come out again. In where I came out, under 2 threads, and come out again. Now I'm going to turn this over and do it left-handed for a few stitches. Give the lefties a break so they can see what to do. I came out here, so I'm going to the other side, going in the very same hole that I used before, but going under 2 threads and out again. Going in where I came out before, under 2 threads and out again. Each time I find the exact same spot that I went in. Now sometimes when I do mattress stitch, I will just go under 1 bar on each side. It turns out the same. That might be a strategy that I'd follow. If I were getting close to a place, for instance an underarm seam where I needed these 2 pieces to match exactly. So here I'm just going under 1 bar. I'm going to go ahead and finish up the seam. 2 bars. Pull it tight and show it from the right side and the wrong side. I actually tighten it a little bit more often when I'm really making a garment. Now, you see when I pull that open, a little bit of blue shows. This is why you would use a matching yarn. But look how very smooth and invisible this seam is. This is a very attractive way to do your seams. It's really pretty fast after you practice a bit. Let me flip this over. This is how it looks on the wrong side. And let me turn it so that you can see the stitching running along the seam. I would also like to mention that on this seam, I went along exactly 1 stitch from the edge. The same seam can be done a half stitch from the edge to make this inner seam a little thinner. Or if you're taking a sweater in, you could certainly go a couple of stitches or 3 stitches from the edge so that you would have a thicker seam and you would make the sweater a little bit smaller. But almost every time I put the seam in, I do it 1 stitch from the edge. So that is mattress stitch. Sometimes it's called weaving the side seam. And I hope you'll practice that and it'll become very, very easy for you to do.